Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. And they can actually hear me say that. I've arrived at the northern boundary, I hope, by now. Something might have happened along the drive, fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I heading north to patrol the Canadian North Woods to make sure no one gets across the border. But while I'm gone, or at least getting set up and getting the antenna up and the generator going, Ed Morrissey is in Texas, because I'm sure it's just as nice and cool in Texas as it is up in the northern border. So, Ed Morrissey, thank you very much, my friend. Take it away.
Thank you, Hugh. This is Ed Morrissey coming to you live from the ReliefFactor.com studios in Texas. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Great to be with you today. Lots to discuss, not necessarily including Hugh's backyard generator, but we've got a generator question of our own today, which is, what is this economy generating? Is it going to continue to generate rapid growth as Janet Yellen promised yesterday, or is a recession coming as a previous Democratic Treasury Secretary promised? Now, you've got really two very different looks at this coming to you from Democratic Treasury Secretaries. Let's take a listen to Janet Yellen yesterday talking about what her outlook is on the economy.
I expect the economy to slow. It's been growing at a very rapid rate as the labor market has recovered and we have reached full employment. Well,
I'm not exactly sure how much you can squeeze into that 12-second clip, so that's not correct. First off, we haven't reached full employment. I mean, honestly, this is just math. All you have to do is go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and take a look at the numbers, and you'll know that we haven't reached full employment. Just on a static basis, we are about 900,000 jobs short of where we started in February 2020. So that's at the very beginning of the pandemic. February was the last full month of full employment before we started shutting down parts of the economy. In March, you start losing tons of jobs. By April, you've lost 22 million of them. But in February of 2020, we had the last stable jobs level in the United States. And as of the last jobs report for May, we are 900,000 jobs still shy of that point. So we're still technically in a jobs recovery mode. Now, that is, as I said, a static measure of the job situation in the United States. You have to also factor in that we grow the population in the United States by about 2 million to 2.5 million a year, depending on the year. Probably a little slower during the pandemic year, especially in 2020, but thanks to Joe Biden's border crisis, et cetera, it's probably actually a little significantly faster than that last year. But also in terms of births, in terms of legal migration, and that sort of thing, we're generally growing population in the United States by about 2 to 2.5 million people a year. Well, if you take the lower number, 2 million a year, and you apply the labor force participation rate, that's 60%. Actually, it's a little higher than that. 63%, I think, is the labor force participation rate. Employment to population ratio is right around 58, 59%. Well, let's go down the middle and just say 60%. So if we grew by 2 million in each year following that, and again, we're actually a little bit more than 2 years out from February 2020, that's 4 million people, and at 60%, you should expect that we would have created 2.4 million jobs more on top of what we had in February 2020 in order to employ that population growth. This is the way that you actually have to calculate. This is a reason why people would be reminded continuously, especially during the early years of the Obama administration, that really you have to add 120,000 or so jobs every month just to keep pace with population growth. So we're actually more like 3.3 million jobs short, 3.3 million jobs short of a full jobs recovery. And this is something that people forget about when they're talking about this. Now, I think it's perfectly understandable that, Joe Q public on the street doesn't remember, oh yes, we have to add in for population growth when we're talking about employment levels. I think it's even acceptable when radio hosts and commentators on Twitter forget about population growth. But when it's your Secretary of the Treasury who is somehow not cognizant of not only have we not reached the February 2020 level of employment, but we haven't even talked about making up for population growth. Well, that's a little different kettle of fish. I would have expected Janet Yellen, if she was actually being an economist right now, rather than a Joe Biden shill, which is what she's become, unfortunately, to have remembered that and not make a claim that we're at full employment. We're not at full employment. And when you take a look at the unemployment number, 3.6%, which was in the last jobs report, you have to remember, too, that we are having some issues in calculating workforce. We're also having some issues with churn thanks to the so-called Great Resignation, where you have people who are just refusing to fill positions and that sort of thing. This is not a necessarily reliable indicator of where the job situation is right now. One of the ways you can tell this, by the way, is the fact that you don't have the same wage pressure that we had before the pandemic started. We were having wages go up as sort of a natural progression. We then had wages go up as in the pandemic, as we were recovering from the pandemic, because we had a whole lot of jobs open up at once and people were refusing to fill them. That has slacked off. Wage growth now is far below inflation level, for one thing, but it's also not growing as fast as it had been a year ago or so. And that tells you that the labor market is not as robust as some would have it. Anyway, this is Janet Yellen. Let's hear from Larry Summers, who actually predicted the inflationary wave that Janet Yellen, Joe Biden, and the rest of the administration insisted wouldn't happen. That would be cut number 8.
I think all the precedents point towards a recession, Chuck. There's always a first time for everything, and I don't want ever to make forecasts with certainty. But if you look at a whole range of indicators, if you look at what's happened in markets, if you look at the relative levels of interest rates of different durations, if you look at surveys of consumer expectations, and if you look at the simple fact that what drives inflation is supply and demand. Supply doesn't change that fast, and so mostly what you need to do to reduce inflation is reduce demand, and that is a very hard process to control, and so it usually leads to recession.
Right. It usually leads to recession, and the reason why it usually leads to recession is because you have a tightening up of, especially when inflation rates are going up, Fed rates are going up, you have a tightening of the money supply, which then cuts into business investment. And when you take a look at what's been going on in the economy, you can just we're going to be talking about this all hour, by the way, because this is very complicated. It's very complicated, but it's not that difficult to understand. When you take a look at what's been going on with consumer spending, which is one of Janet Yellen's points, and also one of Larry Summers' points in contradiction to Janet Yellen, is that you see that after the sugar high of Joe Biden's stimulus package and the final Donald Trump stimulus package, which was never actually allowed to work itself into the economy prior to Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan, you see that you have this initial sugar high in the first 2 quarters of 2021 of double-digit growth in consumer spending, because all of a sudden consumers were flush with cash and they start spending the money. This is before the supply chains, of course, are fixed. And that is what starts off the inflationary wave. But since then, consumer spending has been moderate at best. It was 2.7% growth in Q1. It was 2.5% growth in Q4 of last year. These are not robust spending numbers. They're not bad, but they're not the type of thing that you would say, well, this is rapid growth. You take a look at business investment. Business investment actually lagged in 2021. The investment really came on the final 2 quarters of 2021 and then suddenly drops off in Q1. What does that tell you? It tells you that businesses are starting to pull back. They're starting to be very picky about their investments. And again, it was still in positive territory, but the signals are there that we're starting to enter into dangerous territory, especially with inflation going up as much as it has, and with the Fed obviously expecting to be raising interest rates. People are preparing. People are sort of building their economic bunkers at this point, businesses especially. And if you don't have that kind of business investment going on, folks, the jobs are going to start drying up, and the consumer spending is going to follow. And that is the driver of the American economy. We'll have more when we come back. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by The Matter of Life and Salem Now.
Good morning, everyone. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. Ed Morrissey from HotAir.com filling in today, where disco lives forever. And the airplane slowly comes by and cuts off the antenna. No, I'm just kidding. It's a great scene from Airplane, but disco lives forever. I love the cuts here, and if you think that disco is dead, I'm telling you, it is coming back. It's coming back. Dwayne will tell you disco is coming back. Dwayne isn't happy about it, but Dwayne will tell you that disco is coming back.
You know what? I'll take disco over hip hop.
You know what? I would just like to say, everybody go to their own corners, right? Just give me a disco channel that I can tune in on the satellite radio or on terrestrial radio, and I'm good, baby. I'm good. All right. Speaking of freaking out. We're going to get to a clip here from Sonia Sotomayor that had the left freaking out just a little bit. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about wokeness and corporations. The woke crowd seized control of our schools. Now a minority of loud woke voices are trying to take over our corporations. From Disney to American Express, more companies are taking positions on political issues that they have no business taking. Positions that align with woke activists, but no one else. From discrimination on the hiring front, from the subversive woke ideas like ESG, woke ideology is taking over America's corporate boardrooms and HR departments. That's why we're excited to report that our friends at the Jobs Creator Network are on the case. They're embarking on a major advertising and litigation effort to fight the woke activists and need your help funding it. Go to rockthewoke.com now to do your part. Disney and the others heard from Woke America. It's time that they heard from the rest of us. Go to rockthewoke.com now. Don't let the woke crowd do to our businesses what they did to our schools. Go to rockthewoke.com and help fund this fight. That's from Jobs Creators Network, and great effort there. And I think that at least a couple of these corporations are in the process of realizing just how far they've stepped over the line, but rockthewoke.com will help them realize it just a little bit more. Let's go to this cut from Sonia Sotomayor, cut number 4.
But I suspect I have probably disagreed with him more than with any other justice. That we have not joined each other's opinions more than anybody else. And yet, Justice Thomas is the one justice in the building that literally knows every employee's name, every one of them. And not only does he know their names, he remembers their families' names. And
this is, I love this clip. I love this clip.
Right, it's broken up a couple times because of C-SPAN's satellite.
Yeah, but I mean, I think this has been floating around for a couple of days now, and this is the type of comedy, I think, is the word that I'm looking for, that we expect, at least we used to expect, from people who were running the institutions of power. That you could have disagreements on the House floor, you could have disagreements on the Senate floor. But that at some point they would come together to get their job done. And I think maybe the Supreme Court is the last institution that we have that type of faith in. And even that's getting rattled these days because of the leak. And I don't think anybody thinks that the leaks came from the justices themselves. I think that pretty much everyone suspects it came from a law clerk who had some other motivations in mind. But I think it's a testament, at least, to Sonia Sotomayor's commitment to that level of comedy, that she stood up in this. It's basically the progressive version of the Federalist Society. So she is among her friends and among people who really don't like Justice Clarence Thomas, and for her to stand up and say, hey, look, he's actually a really good guy. And we may not agree on much, but he's conscientious. He's a very good man. He's somebody who really has a connection to the people who work there and to the institution. I mean, I think that that's laudable, and I think it's a moment worth noting in the meltdown that is the Beltway. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
Man, this could be my theme song of all time. I'm not sure that this qualifies as disco, but man, this is the great stuff. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com.
Yeah, this is more funk than disco.
This is funk. Yeah, this is funk. There's a difference between funk and disco, and this is really great funk. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Evolution. Dwayne, have you ever seen the movie Evolution?
Evolution? I don't think so.
It's a silly movie. It's a lot of fun, but it's just a silly movie. You have David Duchovny, Orlando Jones. It was sort of a goofy science fiction film.
So that was the top.
There was a great scene with that particular song.
The top billing was David Duchovny and Orlando Jones.
It was the top billing, and Julianne Moore was in it. And so yes, that was the top billing. It was not an Academy Award prospect.
Did it make more money? Did it make more money than Lightyear this weekend?
Yeah, probably. Maybe not, though. I mean, this was probably like about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I think it was actually more like 20 years ago. But yeah, there's a really fun scene where that play that funky music, White Boy is playing in the background. So yes, it's about killer aliens that evolve in a cave in Arizona, and these guys are the ones that end up stopping it. And not to give out spoilers, but they use Head and Shoulders to do it. Oh, that is a spoiler, actually, but that's okay. That gives you an idea. All right, coming to you from the ReliefFactor.com studios, I am Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll move from evolution back to inflation here, because we've still got some reaction from the Beltway, especially the White House, which is just absolutely struggling mightily to use its Putin's price hike excuse for inflation, even though inflation started in, at least above the line inflation, above 2%, that's the 2% target, started actually in April of 2021, which was, I think, 10 months before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. It started as a result of the final tranche of COVID relief, the American Rescue Plan that Joe Biden absolutely pushed, even while Larry Summers was trying to warn the White House, you don't need any more stimulus in this economy. You're going to overheat it. You're going to create an inflationary wave. Of course, that's precisely what happened. We covered that in the first segment. But let's go to cut number 10, where the White House economic advisor, Brian Deese, is trying to explain to Margaret Brennan that, no, this really is Putin's price hike, and not doing well.
You just have to look around the world today to recognize that the two principal drivers of inflation are the pandemic and Putin. We're seeing this everywhere. It is a global phenomenon. As I mentioned, in the UK, inflation's hit 9%.
Right.
In
but
Europe,
the point
it's
is,
hit
those are the things you can't control. I'm talking about the things you can.
Absolutely.
So how do you win that credibility back?
Well, if we look at the things that we can control, we win credibility by taking action. This president is acting.
Well, I'd say he's acting. Actually, I'd say that's probably accurate, but he's not actually presidenting. He's mostly just acting. There's a reason why inflation is high in Europe right now. It's because Europe doesn't have the resources to produce its own energy. They gave up on nuclear power. Now, Germany, this is just this morning, Germany's going to restart its coal-fired generating plants because they're not going to have natural gas this winter thanks to the Russian embargo. The Russians cut them off, but they were proceeding towards an embargo on natural gas anyway. And so Germany's going to restart its coal-fired power plants because they need to make up for this. Now they can get coal. They have coal. Coal exists there. Oil is in somewhat shorter supply. You have the Brent oil, which is the UK's contribution to world markets, but there isn't a whole lot of oil that you can actually drill out of Europe. So they don't have the flexibility that the United States has in moderating energy prices. If we were drilling, if we were expanding drilling, if we were expanding production, if we were especially expanding refining capacity, we would be able to much more easily moderate gas prices and therefore much more easily moderate the inflation that we have. The reason why we can't do that is because Joe Biden's energy policy, and specifically his Executive Order 13990, you can look this up, imposed all sorts of costs on expansion of any oil and natural gas related projects. So nobody's investing in this. And even if they did, it would take years and years now to expand capacity, especially in refining, where we've actually narrowed capacity over the last several years, to get more gas onto the market more quickly using the demand side, using the supply side to bring the prices down. That's actually the solution. And if they had been doing that from the very beginning, you wouldn't have had the type of inflation that we have right now. You'd have some, because that stimulus bill would have catalyzed it. We had 12 years of free money coming from the Fed, which was really the structural underpinnings of the inflationary wave that we have right now. So you couldn't have avoided some inflation, but you could have avoided a lot of it if you'd had an energy policy that was rational, that where it said we are going to be responsible for producing our own energy, not looking to the global markets to make up for what we don't want to do right now. Let's go to, and by the way, Brian Deese's argument isn't winning a whole lot of plaudits on Capitol Hill. John Thune certainly isn't impressed by the Putin price hike. Let's go to cut number 17.
Washington Democrats have been wrong about inflation from the very beginning. Notwithstanding our efforts to try and convince them that pushing $2 trillion out into the economy was going to be inflationary and create lots of havoc in our economy, they went ahead and did it anyway. And so what we're witnessing now are the effects of that. And the numbers last week were pretty sobering. 8.6% inflation, highest in 40 years. Food increased by 11.9%, the biggest, largest increase year over year since 1979. And gas prices, for the first time ever, now exceed $5 a gallon. That is what the Democrats' stewardship and management of this economy have given to the American people.
So what will the White House do? And that was Senator John Thune, by the way, speaking at a press conference this week about inflation. And he's correct, by the way. And by the way, we should also point out really quickly here that since this has been going on for more than a year, you have to also take into effect now a compounding effect. And we've talked about this before. Since this inflationary wave started in April of 2021, the basis for comparison, the year-on-year comparisons especially, is now higher. It makes everything worse because you're year-on-year comparing to a month that was already high. So when you hear that inflation went to 10.8% year-on-year, this is the Consumer Price Index number that came out for May, you got to remember that May, the previous year-on-year number for May 2021 was 6.2%. So this is, you're compounding on inflation, as it were. And so it makes those numbers look a lot worse. What is the White House prepared to do about this? Well, Brian Deese says they really want some tax hikes to counter inflation. That would be cut number 11.
If we can do a package like that, we can move forward in the near future. It will not only help in lowering prices, but it will send a signal to the markets and the global economy that the United States is really deadly serious about taking on this inflation.
Hiking taxes isn't going to change the price of milk. When and how are you actually putting forward this package?
The package has been debated. It's been worked through.
It failed back when Build Back Better's version of it. So if inflation is the number one priority right now, when are you scheduling a vote to do the things you just laid out?
We're working very closely with congressional leadership, with Senate leadership on that.
Well, Margaret Brennan, it's a little unfair because the White House doesn't schedule votes. You have to work, Chuck Schumer has to schedule a vote. And if it's a tax hike, it has to actually be Nancy Pelosi. Anything that White House hands off to Nancy Pelosi, almost anything, probably will pass the House. The question is, will it pass the Senate? And probably not unless they use the reconciliation package for it. And they're still trying to negotiate that with Joe Manchin. So my guess is that we're not going to see a reconciliation package that is just tax hikes. But I mean, ask yourself this, and Joe Biden was talking about this. You got Ron Wyden talking about a tax on oil companies to force them to produce. Who pays for those taxes? If you think it's actually the oil companies, I would send you back to Econ 101. Tax hikes on businesses get passed on to consumers. How does it get passed on to consumers? In higher prices. What is it that they're trying to solve? Higher prices. Now, ask yourself, Why would you hike taxes in the middle of business taxes in the middle of an inflationary wave where consumer prices are already going through the roof? You're going to either hike the taxes, hike the prices, or you're going to get them to produce less, which will also hike the prices. I mean, you already have a supply chain crisis. I mean, these are gasoline on fire type of solutions. This is Brian Deese in the White House. They just simply don't comprehend economic reality. They have this idea that they have a comprehension of economic theory, but they don't understand economic reality. So they're going back to the standard Democrat progressive playbook that every economic crisis requires a tax hike. Every single one of them. Why? Not because they're actually trying to fix the economy. It's because they want to keep raising punitive taxes on corporations as a way to fund giveaways on other ends. And you said this in the White House. One of the ideas that they were debating was rebate cards, and they would have gone through with it, gasoline rebate cards, except for the fact that they also have a chip shortage going on that they've dropped the ball on, and they can't produce enough rebate cards thanks to the chip shortage. When we come back, Salena Zito is going to join us talking about how all this impacts people in real life. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Ed. I want to make sure I do a couple of sponsorships, even though I'm not on the air live today. The first is Birch Gold. I don't know how high gold is right now. I know inflation continues to roar. Listening on a long, long drive on the news channels, and they all pretty much agreed that recession is coming. And recession means bad things, worse things when stagflation is associated with it. The recessions that you can remember, unless you're 60 years or older, are recessions where the interest rates declined, and that was the way to revive the economy. This recession means it's going to be higher interest rates and higher gold prices. So as one of my callers said last week, they bought gold for the first time since 1979. And yeah, it is kind of like 1979 all over again. If you're about to buy gold, do it with Birch Gold at HughGold.com. You don't even have to buy gold. Just convert some of your IRA or 401k into a Birch Gold retirement fund that is validated by the IRS. It's completely legal in the IRS eyes. That way it can appreciate value and not cost you money as it does so. They'll send you a free information kit. But the first thing you have to do is go to HughGold.com. That's HughGold.com, or text my name Hugh to 989898. And don't forget, ReliefFactor.com. Even if I'm not there in studio taking it live, I want you to remember ReliefFactor.com works. I did my pratfall, if you're a new listener, faceplant on top of a villainous branch. Nothing broken, lots bruised. Took a while to get back into shape, move around. ReliefFactor.com contributed to the healing because it's like icarian curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, 4 natural supplements that doctors and most people who know what they're talking about recommend that you take every single day to add to your body's natural anti-inflammatory system. You can give it a little push in many cases, and if you're short of surgery, keep taking what your doctor tells you to take, but no drugs are in ReliefFactor.com, and it works for tens of thousands of people every single day, hundreds of thousands of people actually, over the course of a month. Some people take it every other day. I take it every day. Some people take it twice a day. ReliefFactor.com, $19.95 is a starter pack. It has not gone up because of inflation because they want you to try it. ReliefFactor.com. Put relief back into your life with ReliefFactor.com, and we'll be right back after this.
If you become a member of the Hughiverse, you not only get every previous Hugh Hewitt show, you get the after show, the best podcast you've never heard. www.hughiverse.com.
It's all disco today at the Hugh Hewitt Show. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, coming to you from the ReliefFactor.com studios in Texas. Joining me right now is my good friend Salena Zito from SalenaZito.com, who is, I'm sure, just as much a fan of the disco era as I am. Salena, great to talk to you today.
I mean, I don't even know what to say after that intro song. That was awesome.
Hey, come on, that's ABBA. That harkens back to my youth, man.
It harkens back to the last time we had an economy like this.
It's true, right? Yeah, it's very reflective. By the way, it also harkens back to get to Selena's post today. We're going to segue right now on this because I really want to hear from Salena about her latest article at the Washington Examiner, talking about American decimation and the shredding of the American spirit in main streets across the United States. Yeah, I remember the 1970s as a teenager, right? And we were struggling with the American spirit in the 1970s, and for some of the same reasons, right? The economy was bad, energy was mismanaged. We had all sorts of political turmoil. It was just I don't know if you want to say celebrated, but the 50th anniversary of the Watergate break-in was over the weekend. And so we had all those things going on, and it really took a long time for us to sort of recover the sense of ourselves. We're seeing that right now, and I think your article here in the Washington Examiner from yesterday, Salena, is amazing, and I think it really drills down on a particular manner in which this is happening now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was actually in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I spent a couple of days there just going back and forth and observing what was happening. And it's amazing. I don't know if amazing is the right word, but just watching, just in this one corner, it's turned into, there's a Civil War statue there. It's the Hampton Battery. And it was always just this very lovely little corner of the park, and it's an open heroin market. I mean, there were the drug trade was going on there. There was at least 20 to 25 people there going back and forth. There was a woman who was dancing around. I mean, not like in Dancing Queen, but sort of very erratically. Then the next thing I know, she just collapses. She's overdosing. There was a gentleman, and I use that term loosely, who leaves the homeless camp that just sprung up recently, walks into a neighbor's, walks across the street. I watched him. Walks across the street down this residential street, comes back with a very lovely patio chair, and walks it back down in the middle of the street and places it in front of his tent in the homeless camp.
Yeah, it's the impunity of lawlessness. I think that reminds me a little bit of the 1970s, but I'm not even sure it was quite this bad and catastrophic. You write, we are watching in real time the unraveling of our social fabric in cities, suburbs, and small towns. It is decaying right before our eyes, with governmental and political inertia making it all possible. And I think that, I mean, you're talking about something that you saw in a microcosm that I think everybody relates to, because I think I was visiting my old stomping grounds in Orange County, California, and I've never seen homelessness in that area of Southern California like I saw it when I was out there. I mean, it's just exploded all around. I lived there 25 years ago, and it was nothing like that. And I realize that kind of makes me sound like an old fogey when I say I lived there 25 years ago. But I mean, it's not just the inner cities. Is my point? It's
everywhere.
Right.
And I think, Ed, I think the really important thing to note, and I called the city council person, who was about as helpful as a doorknob, and he's like, well, there's city services, and I said, This isn't about a lack of city services.
Right.
This isn't about a lack of shelters. This is mental illness that we're not addressing. And we see that problem with the drugs. People self-medicate. Today there's still this stigma with mental health. This is, we see that with the problem with guns. But nobody wants to ever address mental health.
Right.
Ever. Not in a meaningful way. And the police, I talked to the police off the record, and they're like, we can't even arrest them. There's no political will to do anything about the crimes that are being committed.
It's Salena Zito from SalenaZito.com. You got to go to SalenaZito.com because she writes for the Washington Examiner and also for the New York Post and contributes at CNN. So you can get all the links at SalenaZito.com. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. And they can actually hear me say that. I've arrived at the northern boundary, I hope, by now. Something might have happened along the drive, fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I heading north to patrol the Canadian North Woods to make sure no one gets across the border. But while I'm gone, or at least getting set up and getting the antenna up and the generator going, Ed Morrissey is in Texas, because I'm sure it's just as nice and cool in Texas as it is up in the northern border. So, Ed Morrissey, thank you very much, my friend. Take it away.
Thank you, Hugh. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Texas, where it is as cool as the other side of the pillow all the time here in Texas. Great to be with you. Thanks so much for being with us today. We're still talking a little bit about inflation, but we're going to start talking about the political impact of inflation rather than necessarily deconstructing all the spin that's coming out of the whirling dervishes of the White House and their allies. But before we go, let's get one more spin attempt in from Jennifer Granholm talking about the gas prices. They're completely focused on gas prices. That would be cut number 20. Cut number
for
7.
Sure.
Folks.
I mean, the president is really focused on preventing these inflationary increases to the extent he can. Inflation obviously is happening globally. A recession is not inevitable. The president really wants to have a steady and stable recovery. But of course, one of the biggest pieces of these inflationary increases that we're seeing is the price of fuel.
I mean, it's like saying that one of the reasons why you have that big fire is because we poured gasoline on it. So yes, I mean, this is. Obviously, it's the price of fuel. The price of fuel is part of the inflationary wave, and it's something that is, again, completely within control of a rational energy policy. Joe Biden just simply refuses to enact a rational energy policy. He's busy blaming the oil companies, and believe me, I went off on a tear over the last few days, fact-checking Joe Biden's claims on oil companies making record profits and they don't pay taxes, and refineries are making record profits, all of which is utter nonsense, and all of which is intended to distract from the fact that it's Joe Biden's energy policies that are creating the lack of ability to expand so that you can, A, meet demand, and B, bring prices down, and C, by the way, also impact global prices so that it takes money out of the pockets of people like, Vladimir Putin and Ali Khamenei in Iran. Those are the types of things that a rational energy policy will get you. And it doesn't mean that you're going to avoid all of the inflation because, again, there's more to inflation than just gas prices. But gas prices act as a force multiplier in the economy because it impacts the prices of goods and some services along a distribution chain. So every time something moves from one point to another point, you have to pay for either gasoline or diesel along that way, and if gas or diesel prices are going way up, then so is the price of moving that product. And who pays that? The end-use consumer, who pays a higher price in the grocery store or in the big box store or any other retail place because the price of gasoline is jacking up inflation. So if you had a rational energy policy, you could actually probably eliminate a very good chunk of that inflation that we're seeing right now. And you know who's not buying the Putin's price hike or the horrible oil company line? Well, pretty much everyone, according to an IBD tip poll. And this is where we're going to get into the politics of an inflationary wave. Joe Biden's, I mean, it's no secret that Joe Biden has lost the confidence of the American people. You can take a look at Real Clear Politics and take a look at their President Biden job approval chart, which is, busy diverging like this, with disapproval skyrocketing up over 54%. His approval rating right now is below 40%. So you've got a 15-point gap, and that's only growing wider. And the inflection point is clearly Afghanistan. But everything since then is likely to be mostly inflation. Nobody's buying what Joe Biden is selling, and that's especially true now on inflation. Even if they were inclined to do that, They certainly aren't now. According to a new IBD tip poll, which just came out, you can go to issuesinsights.com, our friends at Issues and Insights, issuesinsights.com. They have the breakdown of this. And this is where I'm reading this from, too, issuesinsights.com. The IBD tip poll has 64% of Americans saying that Joe Biden is very responsible or somewhat responsible for current inflation. Only 25% are saying that he's not very responsible or not at all responsible. So that's 64-25 with 10% of Americans saying that they're unsure. So that's 64-25. That's overall. Now, if you've got 64% of Americans agreeing on something, first off, that's rather amazing. Secondly, you know that it's bipartisan. Or it's tripartisan if you want to include independents in there. And we are going to include independents. Let's go to the independents first. What do independents think? Well, basically the same as the top line. It's 63% of Americans 63% of independents think Biden is very responsible or somewhat responsible for inflation. 26% say that he's not very responsible, not at all responsible. And again, 10% of independents are unsure about this. You can probably guess what Republicans think. I'm sure you can guess what Republicans think. I think the big surprise here is that there is, I think, about 10% of Republicans, because one of the sizes is too small, they don't have a number on it, but about 10% think that he's not very responsible or not at all responsible. But otherwise, it's 88% of Republicans think that Joe Biden is very or somewhat responsible for inflation. But what about Democrats? Democrats must be rallying behind the president, right? They must really be getting behind Joe Biden. Well, not so much, actually, because you have 53% of Democrats who think that Joe Biden is very responsible or somewhat responsible for inflation. You have 39% of Democrats who think he's not very responsible or not at all responsible for it. So that would be 53-39, or if you want to reverse it, really 39-53, because the negative position should be on the other side. But, yeah, this is... that's a bad number. 22% of Democrats think that he's very responsible against 12% of Democrats who think that he's not at all responsible. So the Putin price hike thing, the corporate greed thing, not even Democrats are buying this. In fact, the only group in this, and I'm saying IBD tip, actually, Investors Business Daily does a lot of business with tip, but this is actually an Issues and Insights poll, so it's I&I tip. Issuesinsights.com again is where I'm reading this. This is what they write. Indeed, of all the major demographic groupings followed by the I&I tip poll, just one was below 50% overall, self-described liberals. All other groups, and by the way, that's only barely below 50%. That was 48-45. Joe Biden being responsible, or 45-48 if you want to look at it that way. 46%, 46-45. 46% of self-described liberals think that Joe Biden is very or somewhat responsible for current inflation against 45%. So it's still not good, even with the liberals. All other groups, including black voters, 61%, Hispanic voters, 61%, men, 68%, women, 61%. That's a huge demographic for Democrats this fall, along with every income group, every age group, and every education group all felt that Biden's policies caused the current inflation mess. Yes. And the reason for that is because Biden's policies did cause the current inflation mess, and did it in two ways. One, we've already discussed the energy policy. That was on day one. It was a big deal for him. He announced, "Oh yes, we're going to do this on day one. We're going to get this on day one. We're going to really crack down on oil companies and oil and gas production." That's Executive Order 13990. Again, you can go and see for yourself all the regulations and requirements that were imposed on anything that had to do with drilling, exploration, refining, everything. All the different lines. That's part of it. The other part of it, of course, was the American Rescue Plan, the $1.9 trillion stimulus plan, which followed 2 months or 3 months after the previous stimulus plan, most of which hadn't even been spent yet. I mean, the stimulus had gone out, but most of the rest of that, I think it was a $1.4 trillion package, if I'm not mistaken. Most of it hadn't been spent yet. And you had economists like Larry Summers, we talked about this last hour, warning that you're going to overheat the economy. So yes, the reason why 64% of Americans think that Joe Biden's somewhat or very responsible for current inflation is because Joe Biden really is very responsible for current inflation. It's almost undeniable. This is not a Putin price hike. This is not corporate greed. This is not, well, this is really just growth, or the other half dozen excuses that Joe Biden has tried to wish this away. This is Joe Biden's policies. We're going to talk about this more as we go on in this hour, including the impact that this is going to have. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Prison Fellowship Academy.
Welcome back. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com filling in for Hugh Hewitt today. And despite the rumors that you might have heard, it is not an inferno here in Texas. It's actually a pleasant day here in Texas at the ReliefFactor.com studios here in the South. And really enjoying this. And by the way, I hope that you all had a really nice Father's Day. Maybe you went out to dinner or just spent time with your family like I did. But for millions of inmates in America's prisons, Father's Day used to be just another day of the week, but that was before our friends at the nonprofit Prison Fellowship created their Prison Fellowship Academy program, providing direction and hope to men and women, showing that the gospel transformation can pave the way for them to be renewed and resurrected through godly principles.
It's amazing what renewed values
Prison Fellowship's
and
Cody
can do
Wiles
to change
says
the
that
trajectory
message
of a
really
person's
resonates
life.
with
Prison
inmates.
Fellowship is committed
to have people believe in them, to walk alongside them, and to train them to become good and flourishing citizens. And not only people who don't commit crimes, but people who perpetuate a process of renewal, who take responsibility for their communities and make them better. To build communities and to create opportunities for men and women in prison to practice and develop values that transform themselves and others into good citizens.
Do me a favor, do yourself a favor, and go to HughHewitt.com, click on the bright Breaking the Cycle of Crime banner to learn more about the great work of Prison Fellowship Academy. We're going to be talking with Don Caballero from Prison Fellowship Academy later in this hour. So that gives you an opportunity to go check that out right now and do what you can to help out Don Caballero and the Prison Fellowship Academy. And speaking of Father's Day, we had a nice Father's Day. We actually, our family lives far away from us, so we got some phone calls in, which was great. And we had some good friends come over, and we did some grilling, and they actually had to drive quite a way. I was going to joke around about the fact that I had a great Father's Day because I didn't have to get in the car. But then I remembered, of course, that our friends drove actually about an hour or so to come over and visit us. And Dwayne, I kind of felt like I should have served something more than burgers and salads for them. I think I should have had sort of like the roast duck à l'orange for them as they got here. Right?
Texas, you said steak.
Everybody liked the burgers. Everybody opted for the burgers. So I
should have had the steaks.
And not to step on Hugh's fine plug, but I actually was doing it on the Solaire grill too. So
well, that seems appropriate.
It is appropriate. Solaire grills. It's I actually love my Solaire grill. I've had it for about 11 years now. It's
there
awesome.
You go, Rhett.
Rhett's probably going yes. But yeah, what'd you do for Father's Day?
I went out to dinner with my wife and stepkids yesterday, or Saturday night, and Sunday my wife and I went on about a 40-mile bike ride.
A 40-mile bike ride. Did you fall off after trying to get off with the toe clips?
No, because I didn't. I did not pull a Biden.
I mean, we joke about this, but honestly, if you've ever done any serious bike riding in your life, I don't know anybody who hasn't pulled that particular maneuver with the toe clip, right? I mean, come on, honestly.
I have not pulled that maneuver in front of a bunch of cameras.
Well, yeah, but how many people follow you around with cameras while you're riding your bike there?
Well, this is true.
Because this was sort of the chatter is Biden falling off the bike. Now I have to say this though, because I think it's overblown. I think the fact that he was on the bike in the first place is pretty good for a 79-year-old guy. But if this was a Republican president, that would Saturday Night Live would have a continuing series of the president falling off of something.
Trump would have been on a bike and fell over.
We don't even have to say if. Remember when he was being helped down the ramp by I forget who it was. It was one of the flag commanders. He was being helped down that ramp. I mean, I don't know. I don't even remember what the event was. All I know is that clip got played over and over and over and over again, as an example of Trump's too old for the office. I don't know. You see Joe Biden, and of course we've actually, people on the right have replayed the Joe Biden stumbling in Air Force One
falling
steps.
Up the stairs.
Falling up the stairs, yes, falling up the stairs. We're going to see this get replayed over and over again on the right. I sauce for the gander, I guess is what we can say, Dwayne, but I'm glad that you had a nice Father's Day. I had a nice Father's Day as well. I hope everybody out there had a nice Father's Day.
And I kept the wheels below me.
Keep the wheels underneath you. Keep your toes in the toe clips, folks.
Yes.
I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to SalemNewsChannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
We're bringing you the best of the disco era here at the Hugh Hewitt Show. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, where I live for the bumpers, man. This is great stuff. This is so much my youth. I am having such a blast doing this. Thanks for being with us. We were just talking about, before the last segment, we were just talking about the I&I tip poll, the Issues and Insights tip poll. Issuesinsights.com is where you can find this. They just put this up just before we went on the air. And we're talking about how polls, the poll shows that majorities of Democrats, excuse me, as well as independents and Republicans, hold Joe Biden significantly responsible for the inflation that they are now experiencing, and Joe Biden and his policies. And we went over some of the demographics there, and it says, hard to imagine a more sweeping repudiation of a president's economic policies. And it is hard to imagine that until you scroll just a little bit farther down on the same page. And it asks the question, does excessive government spending contribute to does it worsen inflation or lessen inflation? Is the way this question was asked. Does excessive government spending worsen inflation or lessen inflation? Now, to be fair, that question does sort of tip a little bit. The use of the word excessive probably is a little bit of a tell on that. Maybe it would have been better to say increased government spending, but I would argue that what we've experienced is excessive government spending anyway, because we've been spending the $1.9 trillion plan was part of $6 trillion in off-budget stimulus, which required a rapid expansion of the monetary supply, which now the Fed is trying to contract. So excessive is probably an accurate word in terms of polling. I'm sure there's going to be some people who quibble about this. And I'll get to the reason why I bring this up, because the poll shows that actually slightly more people, 66%, 2/3 of all Americans, agree that excessive government spending worsens inflation. Now, again, this is sort of Econ 101, right? if you're doing deficit spending by its very nature is inflationary. And the only reason why we haven't seen a real reaction to this is because the monetary supply has been so open that it has allowed for a lot of bad policies to be mitigated prior to now. But now with inflation going on, you can't do that any longer, and you're going to start to see a lot of pain coming from off of this policy. But so overall, 66% of Americans think that excessive government spending worsens inflation. Oddly enough, 14% thinks it helps lessen inflation. Those are the 14% who are listening to Joe Biden, apparently. But even among Democrats, this is not really a controversial position. 52% of Democrats think that excessive government spending worsens inflation. Only 24%, believe that excessive government spending lessens inflation. Among independents, 69% to 11%. Among liberals, 53-20. This is not a controversial position. Excessive government spending worsens inflation. Not at all a controversial position. And so, I mean, you can just imagine what the demographics are and all these different things. I don't have the demographics in front of me, but I think that if you're seeing those in just the partisan and ideological demographics, you can imagine that among black voters, Hispanic voters, men, women, age groups, income groups, probably all the same thing. You're seeing a mass consensus, and even more so than on the Biden question, a mass consensus that excessive government spending worsens inflation. Now, if you actually follow economics, you might say, well, gee, that's like saying water is wet. Right? I mean, it's not even a theory, right? It's not a hypothesis. It's not even an economic theory. It's just reality, and it's something that we used to broadly accept as economic reality. Well, the reason why I bring this up is because of Joe Biden's preferred method of dealing with inflation, which is to pass a massive spending bill. He wants to still pass his Build Back Better bill, which was at one point a $5 trillion bill over 10 years. It got whittled down to, well, it was supposed to get whittled down to $1.8 trillion, but they used so many gimmicks that it was still about $4.5 trillion if you measured it accurately without the sunset provisions that were clearly not going to ever be allowed to take place. And again, we're going to have tax hikes to pay for that, which is going to impact consumers. It's a disaster. The whole idea is a disaster. And yet Joe Biden is still pushing this idea, which is why we turn to Real Clear Politics, because Real Clear Politics actually does a lot of really interesting, fun things with polls. It tracks not just overall job approval numbers, but also it tracks approval numbers on things like immigration, coronavirus, pandemic management, foreign policy, direction of the country, and the economy. And you can probably guess where Joe Biden's numbers are on the economy. It's actually not terribly far off of his overall job approval numbers, and it's in the wrong direction for Joe Biden off his job approval numbers. His actual RCP average right now for recent polling on the economy is 33.6% approval, 61.4% disapproval, a spread of about 28 points. And it's only that low because The Economist and YouGov keeps running these polls that are clearly outliers that just show a single-digit gap for Joe Biden. 4351 is their latest iteration of that poll from last week, and they're the only ones that have Joe Biden in the 40s on the economy. They're the only pollster that has him in the 40s. Everybody else has him in the 30s or lower. Fox News poll, which people are going to say, well, Fox News. It's Fox News. Fox News polling is actually friendlier to Democrats than you'd think, and they have him at 2967. I could go down the list. Political Morning Consult, very, not at all unfriendly to Democrats, 3260. Harvard Harris, again, also not unfriendly, 3565. Quinnipiac, 3362. NBC News, 3362. Those are the latest iterations of those series. And the reason why his polling data is this low is because he keeps pushing policies and excuses that are threadbare at this point. The American Rescue Plan was a massive spending bill that was supposed to rescue an economy that was already largely recovering. Again, you go back and you take a look at the you take a look at the economy after the pandemic shutdown, and we were operating in the 3s and 4s in terms of GDP growth. Now you can goose that by doing stimulus, and of course at the very end of 2020, Congress and the White House decided to pass a stimulus bill, and Trump insisted it should have been bigger, and that sort of allowed the political momentum for the American Rescue Plan to take place in March. But it was unnecessary. The stimulus portion of that was entirely unnecessary, and it's a massive spending bill on top of other massive spending bills. You can talk about the infrastructure bill, which was a bipartisan effort. Everybody wanted a piece of the infrastructure bill because politicians love infrastructure. You can do all sorts of pork in infrastructure. Even if you don't do it through earmarks, infrastructure is a way of saying, look, you do a road project, you put a sign on it and saying, this is because I signed an infrastructure bill. Obama did this in 2009, 2010. Those are political winners, even if they're not economy winners. They're political winners. But that's sort of the traditional off-budget spending that you can expect out of Washington. The other spending that was done, the American Rescue Plan, the other COVID stimulus packages for that matter as well, and Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan. This is all extra budget spending that you don't normally get. And in this particular case, is not particularly wanted either. It's off topic. All of this is off topic. The Build Back Better plan is still, by the way, under discussion apparently. Politico reported, I believe it was on Friday, that Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer are still discussing this. They're still talking about doing deficit restriction and some climate change stuff. And well, the deficit reduction obviously would be nice. I don't think you get there by spending money. Climate change stuff. climate change is one of those things that you worry about when you have the luxury of not having anything else to worry about. Right now, people want gas in the tank. They're not really concerned about climate change. They're worried about putting gas in their tanks. They're worried about getting to work. They're worried about buying groceries. I mean, I went and bought groceries on Friday, and I'm still looking at shortages in the bread aisle. I'm still looking at shortages in some other aisles. And I mean, I'm fine. You know, I'm doing well. I don't have a problem paying the higher prices at the moment, but I worry about people who are on fixed incomes. I worry about people who are in lower income brackets than I am, who can't absorb these shocks. And to hear President Biden going on and on about how he's going to spend money on climate change, I mean, you're looking at the polling here. You're looking at the results of that, and it is so off topic. We're going to talk about this more in the next hour, by the way, because Van Jones on CNN had a really good, very brief but really good analysis of what happened in the special election in Texas's 34th congressional district when Mayra Flores beat the Democrats down there and won a runoff election outright in a district that had never, ever gone Republican. Not in this map and not in previous maps either. And what it's going to mean. Why did that happen? It's because Joe Biden and other Democrats are talking about topics that don't matter to voters. They're talking down to voters. And the INI poll shows exactly what the result of that is a complete disconnect for the Biden administration, a complete disconnect for its surrogates. And you got Brian Deese going out there talking about a tax hike as a solution for inflation, and even Margaret Brennan is going, well, that's not going to lower the price of milk at the grocery store. It's also not going to bring more milk to the grocery store. You got Joe Biden going on and on about evil oil companies, and that probably has some resonance with people who just are suspicious of large corporations in general, but it doesn't lower the price of oil. And it's very clear that Joe Biden has the flexibility in his own energy policy to at least alleviate some of this, and he's not doing anything about it. That's the disconnect, and that's the reason why this is going to be a huge problem in the midterms. We're going to talk about that more in the next hour. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Hugh Hewitt. Don't forget ReliefFactor.com. I remind you about this every hour, even when I'm not in studio, and wonderful Ed Morrissey fills in for me because I can't get power. Ed Morrissey takes ReliefFactor.com. I don't know if he does. I do every single day. Every single day, whether I'm in D.C., in California, on the northern border, or patrolling the southern border, as occasionally I will do. I want ReliefFactor.com to be a part of your life because it works. I carry it in Kirkman, resveratrol, and Omega. Those are the 4 natural supplements, no drugs involved, that help activate the body's natural anti-inflammatory system so that those aches and pains that come with aging and exercise don't plague you. Now, maybe you don't exercise. Maybe you're a toadstool. That's fine, too. You're still going to get old today, and that's going to mean more aches and pains. But ReliefFactor.com will help you if you give it a shot. $19.95, no inflation in the starter pack, 3-week trial supply. Join the tens of thousands of people who take it every day, the hundreds of thousands of people who take it every single week. ReliefFactor.com. It works for me. You should give it a try. Ed Morrissey will be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Prison Fellowship Academy.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios. I spoke earlier about Prison Fellowship Ministries and their important work. I'm privileged to introduce Don Caballero from Prison Fellowship Ministries so that we can speak a little bit more about that. First off, God bless you, sir, and the work that you do at Prison Fellowship Ministries, Don. It's really important work.
Well, I appreciate it, Ed. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
So tell us a little bit about about Prison Fellowship Ministries and really about the challenges and rewards that you experience working in this ministry.
So first, let me just say that Prison Fellowship, we are the largest Christian nonprofit serving the previously incarcerated population and their families, and we are at the forefront of criminal justice reform. And the Academy specifically is a program that brings men and women in select prisons together. And they go through a whole year of a holistic approach to address the issues that research continues to show that if a person who is involved in the criminal justice system, if they don't address these specific issues, they're at a much higher rate of either remaining in the system or once they're released, returning back to prison. So we address issues such as trauma, addiction, finances, family situations. We have an approach on core values that we're founded on, which are integrity, responsibility, community, productivity. And we use this as an opportunity to bring them together, and they're transferred to that institution, to that prison for the specific reason to go through the program, or either they're selected from that prison to go through the whole year of the program.
Yeah, Don, I mean, this is important because what we want to get people to break that cycle. I think too often we just release people and don't provide them any sort of real support. And I'm talking about now the official systems, the state-run systems, the federal systems. It's really just sort of sink or swim. They get released out of prison. It's sort of a sink or swim. It really falls to volunteers and private sector efforts, charity efforts such as Prison Fellowship Academy, to give these men and women the support that they need to actually succeed in rehabilitation.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, Ed. So if we look at the system as a whole, we have about 2.2 million men and women incarcerated today. That's about 900,000 that will be, or 700,000 that will be released annually, because 95% of that population are released back into our communities. So,
right.
The system some years ago was set up to keep our communities safe. So we'll put them in a place that they're not going to affect our communities. But the reality is most of them are coming back. So using Prison Fellowship staff to help them through the process of this with delivering content, case management, one-on-ones. But it is so important that we have the message that our volunteers are a vital part of this process as well. So helping to keep our community safe on the outside is one thing, but also helping to keep our community safe on the inside, because they are a part of a community. And if they don't start working on these issues now, more than likely they're not going to work on them once they're released, for those who are going.
Well, and of course, when they are released, even I'm sure that most of them would prefer to get back into normal society and to become productive people and law-abiding people. But the deck is stacked against them a little bit, because once you have a record, it's more difficult to get employment. It's more difficult to find a place to live, because credit checks and background checks are now pretty much standard operating procedure for housing rentals and that sort of thing. There's all sorts of obstacles that they already have to overcome if they don't have the skill set in place that Prison Fellowship Academy can help build. I mean, they're really set up for failure at some level.
Yeah, absolutely. So another part of Prison Fellowship, another program, is our advocacy team, and they are at the forefront of criminal justice reform. And a part of this is addressing these issues, these collateral sanctions that are set in place for somebody who has a criminal record. And you mentioned some of those, and there are hundreds of them. So if you have a criminal record, you are set up for failure. I mean, it's already a difficult path trying to manage your own internal stuff, let alone having to go against the system. So yes, having those policy changes are important, and to give them at least an opportunity, a chance. And the academy is providing, I guess you would say, some of those internal factors. So the external factors are important, but even with those challenges and barriers, how is a person who is in the system going to manage those that are set in place?
Don Caballero from Prison Fellowship Academy. Give us the URL real quickly where people can go to find out more.
You can go to prisonfellowship.com or prisonfellowship.org, and you can go to our website, and all of our programs are listed on our website, prisonfellowship.org.
prisonfellowship.org. Don Caballero, thank you so much for being with us. I'm Ed Morrissey of hotair.com. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Prison Fellowship Academy.
Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada, and they can actually hear me say that. I've arrived at the northern boundary, I hope, by now. Something might have happened along the drive, fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I heading north to patrol the Canadian North Woods to make sure no one gets across the border. But while I'm gone, or at least getting set up and getting the antenna up and the generator going, Ed Morrissey is in Texas, because I'm sure it's just as nice and cool in Texas as it is up in the northern border. So, Ed Morrissey, thank you very much, my friend. Take it away.
As cool as the other side of the pillow, Hugh, from the ReliefFactor.com studios in Texas, I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Welcome back, everyone. Great to be with you. Talking about all sorts of things today, mostly covering inflation and gas prices, which are going to be the two biggest issues going into the midterm elections, Democrats' rhetoric notwithstanding. And here is where we really get to the politics of this and what the portents are. Now, down here in Texas, we had a special election for a House seat down here, and that was in Texas 34. Now, that district is actually going away. The new map, it's going to be combined up with Texas's 15th congressional district to form a new district down here. But you still needed to fill the empty slot down here left by resignation. I forget the person who resigned. It was a Democrat. This is a area of the country in the Rio Grande Valley where they've only elected Democrats, and Republicans managed to come away with a win outside. It's an outright win. Wasn't a runoff. It was an open election, and the top two qualifiers would have gone on to a runoff election unless somebody got to 50% plus one, and getting 51% of the vote was Mayra Flores, a Latina Republican who is the first Republican to represent this area ever. And Texas Democrats have been trying to raise the alarm on what's happening in the Rio Grande Valley, what's happening in Texas, based on a number of things, including, of course, the border crisis, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But in large part, this is a disconnect based on the inability of Democrats to, A, comprehend what voters really care about, and B, talk to them in language that they actually can recognize. And among the voices who are providing some sanity on this point is Van Jones, who is, a very much a man of the left, but is wise enough to recognize what's going on. He sort of channeled his inner James Carville in this segment on CNN last week that is definitely worth taking a closer look at. Let's go to cut number 15.
Becoming a party of the very high and the very low. If you pull out the working class, you've got people who are very well educated and very well off. Those people talk funny. Latinx, I've never met a Latinx. I've never met a BIPOC. I've never met, all this weird stuff that these highly educated people say. Is bizarre. Nobody talks that way at the barbershop, the nail salon, the grocery store, the community center, but that's how we talk now. So that's weird. And then the people who are very low down on the economic ladder need a bunch of stuff. You wind up over-promising, we're going to give you reparations to people at the bottom of the economic ladder, talking weird to appeal to people at the top of the economic ladder, and the working class walks away from you. That is the danger we're facing.
That is actually, I think, as accurate a statement about what happened in Texas as I think anybody has managed to come up with. You take a look at Texas 34, and that's a district that's 85% Hispanic. So this is not, I saw some suggestions on Twitter that, this is white supremacy. It's 85% Hispanic in the Rio Grande Valley. This is not the only district that's 85% Hispanic. You've got Henry Cuellar's district, and you got Vicente Gonzalez's district right next door, and both of those districts are 80+% Hispanic. They're also only about 15 to 17% rural, so this isn't an issue of, it's not representing the cities. These are fairly urban centers. I mean, the Texas 34 has got Brownsville in it, which is the epicenter of the border crisis. So there's this is the type of district that Democrats used to win pretty handily up until last week. In fact, they used to win it pretty handily. Why are they losing Hispanic voters? Because they have become the weird party. And Hispanic voters are tracking differently than black voters are. Hispanic voters are going through the assimilation process, and they're becoming much more ideologically diverse. They have a set of values regarding families, regarding abortion would be one particular issue, religion another. They're working class, aspiring and actually succeeding into the middle class in these areas, and they see the economic results from Democrats as being counterproductive to that. But it's more than that. It's a cultural disconnect, and that's what Van Jones is getting to. And by the way, Van Jones isn't the only person who's getting to that. Hillary Clinton also said the same thing. Now, there was a Financial Times interview, and this was published, I believe, on Friday. And the top line of this, you probably saw this, flying around the internet, is that we're on the precipice of losing our democracy, and that is certainly true. But she had a lot of other things to say here. She said she was talking to Edward Luce, who was the interviewer for Financial Times, and I'm reading from the New York Post because unfortunately I can't access the Financial Times interview itself. It says, in particular, as Democrats appear fixated on the transgender debate, Edward Luce pointed out, quipping, "What sense does it make to depict J.K. Rowling as a fascist?" Clinton agreed with his premise, telling him, "We are standing on the precipice of losing our democracy, and everything that everyone else cares about then goes out the window. The most important thing is to win the next election." And Luce was focused on the transgender issue, but Hillary Clinton called out the defund the police movement. She says she singled out the widely derided push by progressives to defund the police. You need accountable measures, but you also need policing, she said. It doesn't even pass the common sense politics test not to believe that. Some positions are so extreme on both the right and the left that they retreat to the corners. Politics should be the art of addition and not subtraction. And I mean, this is common sense, as she said. It's common sense, but it's that type of language where you have crime that's going through the roof, not just as a result of the language, but even preceding that, where you would say this is not what people in urban centers are going to want to hear. Maybe a small slice of those voters want to hear that. But the net result of this is to have made life substantially worse for the voters that you're trying to woo. And that's precisely what Van Jones is talking about. And I mentioned earlier that he was channeling his inner James Carville, because James Carville was talking about this several months ago. And I believe it was after Virginia. In fact, I know it was after the Virginia elections in November of 21, where Democrats were shocked to find out that they couldn't win the governor's seat in a state that had really turned fairly blue. Glenn Youngkin beat Terry McAuliffe to it, largely on the basis of a fight over parental rights and education and other cultural issues. And James Carville said the problem with Democrats is the wokeness. They're talking like they're members of a university faculty lounge rather than talking to voters in language that they can understand. So you've got Latinx, and I think that, Van Jones mentions Latinx. James Carville also specifically mentioned the Latinx issue, where you're trying to talk to Hispanic voters, and only 2 or 3% of them like the label Latinx. And, Van Jones saying, I've never met a Latinx, I've never met a BIPOC. And that's black. I believe that stands for, I'm not even sure what BIPOC stands for. It's black something and people of color. I don't even recall what the I stands for. Nobody thinks like that. Nobody talks like that. They talk like that in faculty lounges. They talk like that in progressive, drum circles.
Isn't it black, indigenous person?
That's it. Black, indigenous, and persons of color. Black, indigenous, and persons of color.
Yes.
And persons of color. I've never met BIPOC. I've never met a Latinx. Neither have I. And I would say that the Hispanic voters of Texas 34 haven't met them either. And when Democrats are talking like that, they're just showing off this cultural disconnect. And that is a huge part of the problem that Democrats are going to have going into this midterm cycle, is this cultural disconnect. It goes beyond policy. The policies are bad enough, by the way. Even on policies, they would get shellacked on this. But the truth is that the Democratic Party has retreated into this progressive drum circle, and this has been going on for quite a while. And at the same time, they're also doing internal purges that we're seeing people like Ryan Grimm at The Intercept write about, because they're starting to have purity campaigns within these progressive drum circles, and you're starting to see all this internal tension that gets created when you base your politics entirely on identity based on immutable characteristics. It is a nihilistic philosophy, and you're about to see the result of that in the Democratic Party. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by The Matter of Life and Salem Now.
Welcome back. I'd like to say I'm a macho man, but I am at Morrissey of hotair.com, so I think I'll leave that up to you guys to decide whether or not I'm the macho man. But I can remember singing that song when I was in high school and making up words to it and having all sorts of fun because it was a disco era and the disco era was best. So there you go. Filling in for Hugh Hewitt today in the ReliefFactor.com studios. Let's talk a little bit about the matter of life. The fight for the unborn is raging in our country. An unprecedented leak from the Supreme Court indicates that Roe v. Wade is on the brink of being overturned. The debates have never been stronger. During this critical time, a new movie is about to be released. The award-winning film, The Matter of Life, cuts through the rhetoric and hatred and exposes the real issues surrounding the plight of the unborn. The Matter of Life. Stream it at salemnow.com. If you care about protecting the unborn, this is a movie you will not want to miss. It's been hailed as the best pro-life movie ever made. Stream it today at salemnow.com. That's salemnow.com. There is a battle taking place in America. Whether you are pro-choice or pro-life, you need to see this film. Stream it today at salemnow.com and have your own life transformed as you watch The Matter of Life. salemnow.com. Lots of great stuff coming up at salemnow.com too. So take a look around once you're over there and find out what else we have over there. You'll find that we have a lot of really interesting work over there at salemnow.com. By the way, not to change the subject, but I think I found the next DA that's going to be getting the bounce here. If you want to know who's going to get recalled next in the great DA sweepstakes, look over to Loudoun County. We were just mentioning Virginia and the revolt, the voter revolt in Virginia. My colleague Matt Vespa over at townhall.com actually flagged this. A Loudoun County judge has removed the county's Commonwealth Attorney's Office, which is the district attorney's office, from a criminal case, saying the office has shown an inability to prosecute the case with professional standards and, quote, is deliberately misleading the court and the public in an effort to sell a plea agreement. It's a move that some seasoned attorneys and prosecutors say they have never seen in their career, the local Fox News station. Apparently, the Buddha Biberaj, and she was elected in 2020 as part of the progressive DA decarceration type of thing, which, we just got done talking with Don Caballero at Prison Fellowship Ministries, and you're talking about criminal justice reform. There's really a need for some reform, but you still have to enforce the law. And when you get into court, you have to actually represent the truth. The judge said the plea agreement by the Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney, Michelle Burton, states that there were several crimes involved and said the crimes occurred within hours of each other, when actually it stretched out over a couple of weeks. The several burglaries stretched out over a couple of weeks. And the judge called the assessment entirely inaccurate because the defendant is being accused of a possible 12 burglary crime spree spanning 4 counties over 10 days. Basically what they did was they completely misrepresented this case in court to try to get a 6-month jail plea deal in. And the judge read, the Commonwealth is deliberately misleading the court and the public in an effort to sell the plea agreement for some reason that has yet to be explained. Yeah, some reason. The Commonwealth's Attorney Office agreed to a 6-month sentence. At the low end of the sentencing guidelines was 7 months. And once the Fauquier County conviction was factored, the low end of the guidelines was actually 1 year and 7 months. Biberaj has faced criticism in the past, Fox goes on to say, including from her former employees for how she's handling cases and running her office. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar? I bet that sounds familiar to people who work for George Gascon in Los Angeles, people who used to work until very recently for Chesa Boudin in San Francisco. Chesa Boudin, of course, got kicked out of office by the extremely conservative voters of, wait a minute, is that San Francisco? The extremely conservative voters of San Francisco are the ones that railroaded Chesa Boudin out of office? I'm sure that can't be right. And the extremely conservative voters of Los Angeles County have put enough signatures on petitions now to qualify a recall election for George Gascon for the same things. These are the same things. It's the exact same pattern. And if you want to talk about disconnects, this is a really great example of disconnects. We just got done talking about disconnects, cultural disconnect. These progressive district attorneys that progressives have been trying to get installed here so that they can not prosecute crimes, that's backfiring all over the United States too. We're going to talk more about what's coming up in the midterms. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Don't forget to sign up in the Huniverse for more Hugh, more Dwayne, that's me, the after show, and more. www.huniverse.com.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Texas. Always as cool as the other side of the pillow. And great to be back. And we're talking a little bit about what's coming up for Democrats in the midterm as they become the weird party. Now, I even before Van Jones was talking about this, I was talking about the weird party last week because of the focus on drag queens, transgender issues, all sorts of affiliated issues that have absolutely nothing to do with what voters care about in this election. What voters care about in this election are jobs, the economy, inflation, gas prices, crime, and security. So you already have Republicans that are at least trying to focus on a couple of these issues. Let's first go to, because it's my state, let's go to Texas Governor Greg Abbott talking about safety and security, cut number 13.
This is the president's job, national security. And our national security is at risk because of all these terrorists who are on the watch list who may have come across the border. The president of the United States is failing in his most fundamental duty, and that is to keep our nation safe.
And right on the heels of that, Ron DeSantis, who's not on the border. Of course, Texas, of course, is a large part of the border with Mexico. But Ron DeSantis in Florida clearly is going to be running for the presidency in 2024, is also talking about Joe Biden's border crisis. Cut number 19.
Those policies of Biden, his border policies, have been an abject failure. His policies, unfortunately, though, the results we're seeing is in line with the intent of what he was trying to do. He knew that doing these policies was going to lead to this. And so the policies are failing. They're bad. Unfortunately, this is what he was trying to do. And so this is wrong, and we have a responsibility in Florida to be able to fight back. And all of that, those numbers, that's with Title 42 still being in place. He wants to take that away.
Right. Now, Title 42 allows the Department of Homeland Security to immediately expel some people who are crossing the border on the basis of pandemic management. They want to deconstruct the Title 42 issues while they're still fighting in court to reimpose mask mandates on airplanes. Now, those are not necessarily entirely analogous, but if you're an American who's saying, well, wait a minute, the pandemic doesn't matter at the border, but it matters if I get on an airplane, which is actually one of the safest environments in terms of air quality that you can actually be in. How does that compute? And the answer is it doesn't compute. American voters want a consistent application of policy. First off, they want one that doesn't penalize them while privileging outsiders, especially outsiders who are trying to enter the country illegally. And of course, to the extent that this contributes to crime, it just all adds up into a very big problem for Democrats. And you can see the results of this. Henry Cuellar has been talking about this since Biden was elected. And he is 2 districts over from the district that Mayra Flores won last week in a special election. First time ever a Republican has won that district. Even before it was created about 12 years ago, it's the first time that a Republican's been elected from that area since they started having representatives elected from that area. You've got Vicente Gonzalez, who was so upset about this that he actually, arm hooked Sean Patrick Maloney, who's the chair of the DCCC, to say, you guys need to start spending some money down here because we're going to get our rear ends kicked when it comes to November, because they see what's coming. Henry Cuellar, Vicente Gonzalez, they see what's coming. And what's coming is more Mayra Flores, because she's going to start campaigning all throughout those districts. She's got to run again in November anyway. She's going to end up running against Vicente Gonzalez because their districts are going to end up being combined based on redistricting that's taking place in Texas. So Democrats are looking everywhere else but where voters are looking. That may be true in the Republican Party, at least to some extent. And we're already starting to see some indications of this. Of course, there's a lot of people in the Republican Party, Donald Trump, but also some others, who see the midterm elections and then 2024 as a way to relitigate what happened in 2020. And the question is whether that's sustainable and whether voters actually even care about that. I would argue that the fact that the ratings for the January 6th committee are so poor tells you that nobody's really interested in doing that again. Chris Christie joined George Stephanopoulos yesterday to discuss some other polling that shows that maybe Republican voters are starting to, and especially independents, are starting to look more to the future than to the past. That'd be cut number 14.
Well, that's what I was going to say, George. This is not a 22 issue. This is a 24 issue. In 2022, when you have inflation running like it is, issues of crime, concerns about Ukraine and Russia and all the rest of that, the American people are much more consumed with that. And Donald Trump is not on the ballot. Now, if he decides to run in 2024, that's when this will become much, much more important. Because I think what you see underlying that in those numbers is what Republicans are talking about right now, which is he can't win a general election in 24. If independents believe what they believed in the poll, and if they're as concerned as they seem to be, then there's no way you can win as a Republican in this country for a presidential race if they have completely abandoned you. And by the way, that's what all of his people were telling him in 2020, that folks, especially educated suburban white women, were abandoning him in droves. And he talked about it in his rallies. Remember, he'd say, you know, suburban women, please like me. Okay, he knew. That was not, he tries to make it now like it was a joke. I was there. Yeah. It was no joke. He was saying that because he was being told that's what his problem was. That problem has not changed, and everything that's happening in this committee solidifies that, puts it in concrete, and that's why it's a 24 issue.
Well, and again, you can argue that you can have that debate in 2023 in the primaries into 2024. But we all know that the primary season is going to open up in January 2023. So we're really like 7 months away from the primary season opening up. I think the problem that Republicans are going to have, though, if they pursue that, is the same problem that Democrats are having, is that it's going to be seen as a disconnect from what voters really care about. Now, I know that there's some voters who really care about what happened in 2020, but those are really a narrow band of voters already within the Republican coalition. In order to win a general election, you have to win independents. And if you're focused on something that happened 4 years ago, independents are not going to come along for the ride. Now, because we live in a binary system, if Joe Biden is running again for the presidency, and I can't imagine that he's going to be, but if he is, if he runs for a second term, then maybe you can get by on that. But I strongly suspect that Joe Biden is going to find a reason to step aside in 2024. Now, the problem for Democrats is they don't have a bench. If Kamala Harris had proven to be a better campaigner or even a better vice president or just competent, they could probably say, well, he can step aside and let Kamala Harris take his place. But she's proven so bad at what she does, and she did on the campaign trail too. So this is Joe Biden's first really bad policy choice, right? Which was to choose Kamala Harris as opposed to, say, Karen Bass or as Val Demings, who probably would have been a smarter choice in Florida as his running mate. From the people who were on his short list, I'm just talking about the people who were on Joe Biden's short list. Val Demings probably would have been a much smarter choice. She would have been much more prepared to support his policies competently, to speak about them competently. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with Val Demings' politics, but she's competent. She's competent. She's running against Marco Rubio this time around, which is not going to work for her. She's going to wind up out of office as a result. So that is going to quash any idea that she could run for the presidency, because if you lose a Senate race, you're not going to be running for the presidency in the next cycle. They don't really have a whole deep bench there. There's a handful of Democratic governors who might be able to step up, but you're going to have to get the Democrats to start talking about these guys so that they have some sort of national standing. Nobody wants to talk about these guys. Why? Because for the most part, they're either in deep blue states, which means that they're not going to have any resonance with voters outside of the same salons that they're already trapped in with Van Jones's weird party stuff, or they're from red states or purple states where they've had to meet voters where they're at, and so therefore have crossed swords with progressives. I mean, you can look at Andy Bashir, who I have no idea how he'd operate on a national campaign, but he's the governor of Kentucky, and he's had to work with a lot of conservatives being the governor of Kentucky. You can talk about Jared Polis, who's more of a progressive in Colorado, and it's also more of a purple state, but he's also had to reckon with reality in Colorado, especially in the pandemic. He was one of the first Democratic governors to get rid of the, pandemic mandate approach. John Bell Edwards in Louisiana. I think if you're looking for a presidential candidate in Louisiana, you're probably pretty desperate. Not because of the corruption that's in Louisiana. There's all sorts of skeletons that'll come tumbling out of the closet, I'm sure, if John Bell Edwards gets on the ticket. But assuming that he's clean as a whistle, he might be a model for a Democratic nominee, but he'll never pass muster with progressives. So you may end up with a situation where both parties run candidates who are looking elsewhere, and that's the reason why Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, Doug Ducey, if Doug Ducey decides to run out of Arizona, some of those candidates might be a better choice for Republicans simply because they'll be looking forward, and also, not to mention, they'll be under 70 years of age. And I think we've all discovered over the last year or so that maybe we should have younger people in the presidency than we've been electing lately. That, I think, that's almost an undeniable fact at this point. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Hugh Hewitt. I'm up at the Northern Boundary trying to get the summer studio, I call it, the Northern Boundary Studio, where I keep watching the Canadians trying to sneak across the border. If you're trying to buy a house somewhere, you need AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian. I talked to Andrew on Thursday of last week at length. The refi market is dead. He told me that. Interest rates have gone up to 6 and 7%, and nobody needs to refi a 3% into a 6%. You might need a reverse mortgage if you're a senior and you're sitting on a paid-off home and you're just tired of making ends not meet because of the inflation that Joe Biden has unleashed. So if you're buying a home, and lots of people are buying second homes because they realize that's not a Bitcoin investment, that's dirt. That's real estate with a house on it. That's a good investment. Or if you simply have to buy a house and you need financing, you're putting 20% down, or you're a mother, a father, a grandparent, and you want to become a non-occupying co-borrower to help your son or daughter get into a house with a 6% rate, AndrewandTodd.com. You can answer a couple of questions online, or you can simply call them, 888-888-1172. You'll be glad that you did. Don't forget as well, ReliefFactor.com. I remind you about this every hour, even when I'm not in studio, and wonderful Ed Morrissey fills in for me because I can't get power. Ed Morrissey takes ReliefFactor.com. I don't know if he does. I do every single day. Every single day, whether I'm in D.C., in California, on the northern border, or patrolling the southern border, as occasionally I will do. I want ReliefFactor.com to be a part of your life because it works. I carry it in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. Those are the 4 natural supplements, no drugs involved, that help activate the body's natural anti-inflammatory system so that those aches and pains that come with aging and exercise don't plague you. Now, maybe you don't exercise. Maybe you're a toadstool. That's fine, too. You're still going to get old today, and that's going to mean more aches and pains. But ReliefFactor.com will help you if you give it a shot. $19.95, no inflation in the starter pack, 3-week trial supply. Join the tens of thousands of people who take it every day, the hundreds of thousands of people who take it every single week. ReliefFactor.com. It works for me. You should give it a try. Ed Morrissey will be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Welcome back. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Joining us now, probably far too young and sophisticated to enjoy disco music, Josh Kraushaar of National Journal, at Hotline Josh on Twitter. I've been digging the disco music all day long. What's your position on disco, Josh?
Yeah, well, I'm more surprised you like disco. I am a little too old or too young for disco, but I will acknowledge it's not my kind of music. But I did not know that Ed Morrissey was a fan. So that is news you can use.
It is news. It goes right to credibility, as they say in court. So yeah, it's I fully acknowledge that. But you've got tons of credibility. You're covering all sorts of great stuff at Hotline, and I just want to run a couple things really quickly by you. First off, today's a decision day from the Supreme Court. We were just discussing this off air. I don't think anybody really expects the big decision to drop today, right?
I mean, just based on logic, it does feel like the court wants to drop the case at the very end of the session and go on vacation and get out of town. But look, we'll have to see. I also think based on who would be more likely to write that decision, Alito, most likely, I guess, you probably are more likely to see it at the end of the session, not in the first week.
I think you're right. But just so everyone's aware, it is a decision day. There's still 18 decisions left in this term, and this week and next week is going to be, I think, at least 4 announced decision days. So we should expect 4 or 5 decisions a day. So just keep an eye out for it. Possible it's going to drop today. I don't find it likely. I know, Josh, you were looking at a Financial Times interview with Hillary Clinton. We were just discussing this, which I think that the initial reports off of that were. I don't think it were misleading, but I think that there was a focus on it that sort of eliminated some of the other context of this, which is that Hillary Clinton is telling the progressive wing to maybe sit down and shut up for a while so they can win elections. I think that that's actually a rather interesting development, given that she was really all in with the progressive wing after she got past Bernie Sanders, of course, in the 2016 primaries. She really went all in with the progressives on that 2016 election. I mean, do you see this as maybe part of a sea change within the Democratic Party, or is this just nibbling from the sidelines at this point?
Well, that's a really interesting point, Ed. It feels like between 2016 and 2020, after Trump got elected, progressives became not just super progressive, but they became ultra woke. And Clinton, based on her age and frankly, that she ran a campaign pre some of the worst excesses of the far left, as far as like cultural issues, wokeness goes. She almost seems like a dinosaur, and that she can actually say, "Don't defund the police." That's crazy, and she didn't have to indulge in that rhetoric in her own campaign, in her own primary against Bernie Sanders. So, yeah, look, I've been saying this for a while now. I think it's implausible that Biden either runs or effectively runs in 2024. And I think it's going to be really hard, especially the way the economy is headed, for anyone with ties to the Biden administration to be politically savable. It's going to be a really tough environment for anyone, whether it's Biden or anyone serving in his administration, his cabinet, to have, you want to have an outsider. You want to have someone who doesn't have that baggage. And, I've been talking about governors or people outside of Gavin Newsom, Jared Polis, governors, folks outside of Washington. But, Hillary Clinton also fits that bill as someone who was exiled after losing the 2016 campaign. She's younger than Joe Biden. She did say in this interview, Ed, that she's not running for president again. So you got to, I guess, take her at her word for that. But it does sound like, why would she be doing an interview in Washington if she didn't want her name out there, if she didn't want some more Hillary Clinton buzz to get in the Beltway a couple of years before the election?
Well, it depends. I guess you could ask to see what the funding level of the Clinton Foundation is at the moment, because I suspect that it might be more about that than about a 2024 run. I mean, she'd be, 76 years old? I mean, she's younger than Joe Biden, but I think she'd be 76.
She's younger than Biden, and she's younger than Trump. I mean, that is crazy that we're kind of saying 76, 77 is the new, 67. But, yeah, I mean, I think Trump is going to have his own obstacles, own challenges, but I think he's in a little more stronger position in the Republican side of the field. But this is grumpy old men part 2, and I'm not sure if that's what voters want in 2024.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one's Walter Matthau and which one is Jack Lemmon either. But we'll maybe we leave that. But I want to ask you about the governors, because I was talking about that as well. I mean, the Democrats don't have a deep bench, in part because they're really not talking about the governors that they have in red or purple states. Jared Polis gets some visibility. But guys like Andy Bashir, who I don't think really has a personality to make a run for that, John Bell Edwards, there's a couple others that I was writing about last week. Steve Bullock, who's a former governor, who actually ran in 2020 and got bounced out earlier, the primary process. Got about 30 seconds, Josh. I mean, is there any of those people who really can step up?
I think it might be painfully obvious that Democrats need someone outside of Washington by the time we get to 2024 if we're in a recession, if we're facing stagflation. Biden's numbers, look at them now. They're going to be worse if we hit a recession. Harris is going to be tagged with those same vulnerabilities. So I think voters might wise up and say, hey, we need someone totally new, totally fresh. I'd add Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan to the mix if she wins in a tough environment in Michigan. She's going to be seen very favorably by a lot of party leaders. The question is, are the voters going to follow suit, or will they want to go for the next person in line, like Vice President Harris? And it's going to be if Biden retires, ugly civil war.
Josh, we're going to have to leave it at that. Josh Kraushaar at Hotline Josh on Twitter. Go follow him. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Thanks for listening.